Okay. Hello, my name is Anna Barker, and we're gathered here yet again on my comfy sofa to discuss the next two books of Anna Karenina. So now it's going to be books 3 and 4. I'm going to maybe do a little intro, talk about a few things that we are carrying from books 1 and 2 into books 3 and 4. And then I will stop just before book 5 because that will be discussed in the next Zoom when we'll cover books 5 and 6. And in books 5 and 6, I mean, at the very beginning of book 5, we are going to Italy. So I'm going to pause just before we head into another country and follow our characters there. And those characters shall remain unnamed at this point because we have a lot of tragic events happening in books 3 and 4. Well, in books 1 and 2, we meet all of our characters. We have a few absolutely spectacular scenes, joyous scenes, just like the skating scene, and kind of traumatic and devastating scenes, such as the horse race and Levin's very sadly turned out proposal. And then we have the whole blossoming of the relationship between Anna and Vronsky, and the collapse of the relationship, such as it was, between Levin and Kitty. And of course, in book 2, we follow Kitty to the spa. I mean, the father really feels that this is all stuff and nonsense. And who are these doctors anyway? All the girl needs is a husband. And I can tell from the comments that Prince Sherbatsky is a perennial favorite for everyone in this group because he's just funny and he has so much common sense. We have a few fascinating conversations with him just putting his 2 cents in all of the conversations about hot topic issues of the day. And what stuns me about Tolstoy is how current he is, how we are still having the same discussions today. Some of the very, very hot political topics that they are discussing. When I start getting into those chapters, I just feel like, oh my gosh, how am I going to cover this? This is so real. I'm going to have people just on both sides of the political spectrum because these discussions are just we are not through with them. So we focus on all the characters one more time, but these are really, book 3 is the Levin book. Because he has to do so much thinking and he has to do so much figuring out. And Levin and mowing is up there, one of the top 5 scenes of the entire book. It's fascinating how Tolstoy sets it up, because if it would have been just Levin at home, the dramatic tension would not be there. But the fact that he has his brother, the intellectual Kuznetsov, visiting, sorry, I need to admit more. And if you see my left hand wiggle, Watson is here, and he was sound asleep, and now he's trying to find a cozier place to sleep. So we have a 3-year-old Yorkshire Terrier on our premises here in the corner of the sofa. So yes, if Tolstoy would have thrown us into the Levin mowing scene, and there would have been no one in the house but him, it would have been exciting. But Tolstoy heightens the incredible intellectual and psychological and just physical tension of those chapters by bringing Kuznetsov in. He's a doubter. He doubts Levin's ability to do anything. I mean, the relationship between grown siblings in this novel is so delightful because we can see how all of these very, very complex connections are working out into characters' 20s and 30s. And so Kuznetsov is much older, and his poking at Levin is definitely that of an older brother. Oh, this kid, he just has his ideas, and aren't they cute? He's going to go out there and mow with the peasants. And then, I mean, he just can't drop the subject. He's just having so much fun making fun of Levin. And Levin is like, leave me alone. I'm just doing it. And he's saying, well, what? Are you going to have the valet bring for you your, like turkey lunch with your French wine? And Levin is just saying, just leave me alone, I'm doing it. And Levin needs to have this escape because he's so sick and tired of arguing with Kuznetsov. And Kuznetsov loves arguing. I mean, that's the thing that intellectuals do. They just continue arguing till they are the only ones standing, and that gives them a tremendous amount of accomplishment. And so the sense of like fields needing to be mowed, and just the sheer gorgeous physicality of this activity versus arguments need to be argued. And there is no point at which you can say, well, this was work well done. There's no quantifying aspect to intellectual conversations, intellectual discussions, where with physical work, you can see that this row was mowed, and there's the sense of incredible accomplishment. And it's amazing. I mean, those of us who love to just sort of poke around in the garden to the best of our ability, it's amazing how after half an hour of just doing stuff that is just physical and monotonous, right now it's leaf raking season, you start having thoughts that you wouldn't have had before, because your brain just completely relaxes. You just turn it off, and that racing of thoughts disappears, and you are thrilled because you get a chance to just recharge. And so Levin goes into the field and he starts mowing, and he is himself terrified. I mean, that doubt that his brother has in his physical ability, because it is tough. You have to be incredibly physically fit. And we're reminded over and over and over again through these chapters that Levin is incredibly fit. His biceps, remember, it's very like a tight ball. And we are told that he does a lot of exercising, he lifts weights. So he is definitely the fit type of landowner. But still, the peasants do this every day in and day out, all their lives. And so their physical ability is not that of, a body well-toned for occasional physical work. And so when Levin starts moving with them, he puts all of his energy into what he's doing. And the peasants have to tell him, no, you are going to exhaust yourself. You will not be able to continue all day. You have to just pace yourself, and you have to let it become intuitive. You can't think about it. Physical work that has to be done continuously on a continuous basis throughout the day. You can't throw yourself and all of the energy in the first half hour, because it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And so Levin has to completely turn off his head and make the motion intuitive, and it just goes whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. And you have to walk with the peasants in the row, because if you lag behind, then the row is not going to be finished at the same time. And so just the beauty of this monotony of the sound, and how Levin finally turns off his intellect that is racing all the time and gives himself to the joy of physical activity. It is just so rewarding, so incredibly, incredibly rewarding. And then he doesn't even notice how he has been doing it for 4 hours. And he's so proud of himself. And in my commentary, I said that it's very similar to Natasha knowing how to dance a peasant dance at her uncle's in War and Peace. And her brother, once again, there's a brother there who's skeptical, right? And brother Nikolai is a little terrified because he feels that his little sister is going to make a fool of herself in front of the peasants. And that's just not done. You cannot look ridiculous in front of the peasants, because they're going to make fun of you. They will have no respect for you. And so Nikolai's terror of Natasha making a fool of herself is the same as Kuznetsov's slightly more refined terror, but because Nikolai is so young and hot-blooded in War and Peace, and Kuznetsov is older and more stable. But Natasha does it just perfectly. And Tolstoy tells us she knew exactly what is in Anfisia and Anfisia's mother and father and every Russian. And so Levin, somewhere deep down, in his core inner being, he is as Russian can get, because he can walk with the peasants and he can mow like the peasants. And he actually rushes back to have his coffee, but then he's disappointed that he came, because all he sees at home is, Kuznetsov with his intellectual debates. And so he rushes back to the peasants, and he's thrilled to be working with them. I mean, it's just such a delight to see him engage in this activity. And then he gains a a little bit, tiny bit, чуть-чуть, as the Russians say, a teeny bit of respect from Koznachев, but not much. Older brothers, they just keep poking. And then eventually he goes to talk to a peasant family. And that's where he sees young love, young peasant love. And that couple is so remarkable because he sees how they are working together, how there's physicality in their love. And it's not just kind of the brutal physicality, not sexual physicality, but beautiful physicality of young love that awakened to their acceptance of the beauty of each other's physical being. And that translates into their moral connectedness. And so what I always tell my students when we get to that couple, they're so episodic, they're so throwaway seemingly, just, a couple working together, but they're Tolstoy's ideal. They're his Adam and Eve. They're his Adam and Eve. And it's fascinating. The father says, no, Levin asks if, he says, oh, those are my newlyweds, my youngest son. And Levin says, do they have kids? And the father is like, oh, kids. He couldn't even figure out what to do for a year. I mean, that is the beauty. Tolstoy would love to have that kind of physical closeness to a peasant woman without doing anything sexual. Just, like physical connection and moral connection and spiritual connection without the fall. And if Tolstoy could have accomplished that in his life, he would have been a very happy human being. But obviously he couldn't. I mean, Sonia was pregnant 16 times, 12 deliveries, and then 8 children living to adulthood, which is astonishing, right? And the other 4 were miscarriages. So so Tolstoy sees this. I mean, he shows us this physical beauty of a couple that awaken to each other's physicality and moral presence. And he loves it. And then he sleeps. And then the night is very short. Remember, the Russia is such a northern country that in June, there's basically no nighttime. In St. Petersburg, they call those things white nights. By the time you get further south, like to Moscow, you maybe have 2 hours of darkness. And so he wakes up and it's already dawn, and he is just filled with this excitement. And he feels, well, maybe like looking for a peasant woman would be the way to go, because that life would be so honest, that life would be so straightforward and simple. I wake up, I work, we work together towards a goal that is grounded in reality. It's not all of that talk. There's nothing esoteric. It's all visceral, physical, thrilling, real. And that's what he's seeking in life. And of course, he's walking down the hill and he sees a carriage, and he knows that carriage is coming from the Moscow train. Right? I mean, trains are just, references to trains are continuous. And so he knows the train schedule is the Moscow train. And then, of course, he looks into the window of that carriage, and it's a darling, sleepy face of the sun. And it's amazing that he sees her at sunrise, and the sun has appeared for him, and it's the awakening of the sun in his soul. And that moment is beautiful. And he sees that there's an older woman sleeping in the carriage, the mother, but Kitty, with her bright, shining eyes, is just awakening to this newness of the countryside, and she's tying the ribbons of her bonnet under her chin. I mean, it is just gorgeous moment. And Levin knows that all of those fantasies about earnest work and physical and moral uprightness on the land, that all goes whoosh through the window. He's in love with only one woman, and that woman is Kitty. And but of course, Levin wouldn't be Levin if he would not be so stubborn. Dolly, when he comes to visit, and I absolutely adore Dolly. Dolly with the children is one of the most delightful aspects of the entire novel. When she talks to the peasant women, when she takes her little brood of children to swim, it is just, it's pure gold, because when she talks to the peasant women, their concerns and her concerns are the same. How did the pregnancy go? How did delivery go? How long did you nurse? When did the children get their teeth? What kind of children's diseases did they have? Dolly operates exactly in their world, and they respect Dolly for her visible fertility. She has so many children. She has like an entire kindergarten of children, and they are lively, and they are, they're not just, they're not well behaved. And so the beauty of those children is what gives Dolly meaning in her life. But then, of course, she tells Levin, I mean, she's so sneaky, that Dolly. She knows stuff. Like Dolly is a very wise woman. She has premonitions. She understands people very, very deeply. She can see into people's souls. And so Dolly, my smart wife, has the solution for everything in life. And so Dolly, who is very, very clever and very conniving in a very sweet kind of way, she says, "Oh, in her letter, oh, Kitty's here. Could we borrow your side saddle for her? And please bring it yourself if you can spare the time." And Levin is like, "No, that is vulgar." She's throwing her sister at me. She's prepositioning Kitty. That is, how could Dolly, who has such a beautiful soul, be so vulgar? And so, of course, he sends the saddle and never goes. And the summer passes by with all of his cares, and then he visits his friend who has the sister with the rectangular cut. Oh my God. Every time I read through those chapters, I laugh so hard because the rectangular cut on the sister's dress deprives Levin of his ability to think. It's like what his nanny keeps telling him: "Not my business. I'm just thrilled to be talking about philosophy with you while I knit my stocking. But a man of your age needs a woman." And I love how, the nanny will just keep listening to him. And I love what Tolstoy says, that they had all kinds of discussions on all kinds of subjects, but nanny's favorite was philosophy. So, the sweet nanny who, she's his nurse. I mean, she has known him since he was a newborn. And she tells him, "I know it's none of my business, but just saying, it's time for you to get a woman." And then Tolstoy, of course, tells us, and her statement did not originate out of nowhere. She was just waiting for a pause in his soliloquies to remind him that, dude, you need a wife. So when he starts being deprived of thought by looking at women's rectangular necklines, it's a sure sign that the man is going out of his mind. But it's fascinating how that conversation kind of cured him of his idealism. He is he really wants to do all of these things that are good and noble and innovative and revolutionary on the farm, but he knows that the peasants don't want to do that. And so his encounter was the wealthy peasant who has, and the wealthy peasant also uses hired labor, but the peasant says, "Look, but," and Levin says, "Well, I tried hired labor and it never works out well." Well, but the peasant tells him, "See, they're also peasants. We have an understanding that you would not, with a peasant that you hire for wages to work on your farm." So Levin comes home and he talks to his steward and he says, "Everything we've been doing is all wrong." And the steward is like, "I've been telling you this all along." And then Levin says, "So I have a plan and we're going to do everything differently." And the steward is like, "Oh my God, not this again." But then somehow, slowly but surely, there's a back and forth, there's a give and take, and things kind of shape up. And so Levin gets through this phase of trying to figure things out, trying to reason things out within his own soul about how to be a good custodian of the land, but at the same time do things that benefit both himself and the peasants in the aftermath of the abolition of serfdom. Because remember, serfdom in Russia was abolished in 1861, and Tolstoy is writing this novel in just 12 years, 12, 13, 14 years after. So none of the issues are resolved. And that's why I always joke and tell my students that if you thought that Anna Karenina is a novel about love, you're sadly mistaken. Anna Karenina is a novel about land reform with occasional detours into the personal life of the main characters. So now this time Levin goes abroad. He goes to Europe because he wants to study labor laws. And remember, Marx is already very much, though, a phenomenon in Europe. So Marxism is something that his brother discusses, his other brother, his brother Nikolai. He has socialist and Marxist friends, mostly college people. Levin also had brush with the law when he was hiding illicit literature in his dorm room when he was a college student. So the 60s and 70s in Russia were a period of huge radicalization. And what was happening during that period, there were a lot of young students who came from privileged families who were upset about the level of privilege they had. So it's amazing how discussing this aspect of Anna Karenina in today's day and age makes it such a modern novel. But these kids would feel that their privileged life is so completely incongruous with the life of the horrible working conditions that the peasants had, and so they called it "iti v narod," to walk into the people, and they would abandon their college courses and put on simple clothes and go and try to live in the villages and try to help the peasants with consciousness raising. And often it was a disaster for both sides because the peasants did not trust these intellectual kids who did not belong into the countryside, and they would report them to the police right away. And then the kids who wanted to atone for their privileged lives by just like helping out peasants, they were horrified by the working and living conditions of the peasants. You know, they didn't wash, they smelled terrible. The food they ate was disgusting by the standards of these intellectual kids. And so on both ends, it was just sort of a catastrophic and incredibly misguided push to make the lives of these workers better. So Levin, when he talks to the conservative landowners, they are saying, "Oh, you know, the way things were during the time of serfhood, that still works for us. We are still working them, and they are grateful to have the opportunity to be worked half to death because there is system and structure there." Well, Levin is trying to find a middle ground between the very, very conservative, archaic, patriarchal ways of working the land and the ones that are so utopian that everyone dies because when there's no food, then there's no way to move forward in any way, shape, or form. It's fascinating how Levin's travels to Europe chronicle Tolstoy's travels to Europe, because Tolstoy is interested in opening schools at Yasnaya Polyana. He opened peasant schools several times during his lifetime. And so when he went to Europe, and his route is basically Levin's route, England, German states, Switzerland, France, Bavaria. And he studied educational methods and pedagogical systems that were being developed in Europe, because this is the time when public school starts opening. And public schools, you have to figure out what to teach and how to teach. And it's fascinating, his conversation with the conservative landlords is, he's saying like the worker will be more enlightened and will understand things more profoundly and deeply if he's educated. And the peasants are saying, well, no, he doesn't need this education. But at the same, the landlords. But his friend is saying, no, we should have introduced schools a long time ago. And so Levin is sort of torn between this, well, do the workers become more attuned to this reform in the workforce if they're educated, or will they be more drawn to schools if they are already working in reformed work environments that will allow them to have more free time and interest in something like education? These are all Tolstoy's thoughts. I mean, Tolstoy was trying to figure out how to make it work. In my preliminary notes, I mentioned that Tolstoy was working on his ABC book and Tales for Children all through the writing of Anna Karenina, to the point where the Russian messenger, where Anna Karenina was serialized, would have to withhold the installment of the next set of chapters because Tolstoy did not finish them because he was too busy revising his ABC book and his Tales for Children. So these are all Tolstoy's thoughts, but Tolstoy sends his hero to Europe to find out about agricultural reforms and working conditions, while he himself went to the same places to study educational and pedagogical practices. And so we get to the most charmingly sweet and completely implausible chapters of the book, the proposal on the card table. And that's how Tolstoy proposed to Sonia. And it's just unbelievable that by looking at the first letters of phrases, they were so emotionally attuned to each other that they would understand. But Sonia and Tolstoy understood. And so Tolstoy resurrects the scene of his proposal to Sonia in the proposal. And it's amazing how he's juxtaposed to Stiva, who is just the most perfect host the universe has ever created. I mean, I love the fact that he even has time after the guests arrive to send servants to the right kind of store because the alcohol was purchased in the wrong store. I mean, Stiva is just exquisite as a host. And then when he gets home, and of course he's late because he had to visit an actress or a dancer at the Bolshoi, right? And so he gets home and he realizes this party is a disaster. There's this chill in the air in my home at my perfect party. And so within seconds, he can rearrange everyone and start conversations in every circle that would create intellectual fireworks. And he basically arm wrestled people to come to this party because he wanted to have the terrifying boss, right? The new boss has arrived. And then what does Stiva give him? Wine was orange juice. So he basically gives him sangria. He introduces his boss to sangria, and that gives Stiva a push towards the acquiescence of the terrifying new boss. So the terrifying new boss is invited, Levin is invited, and then of course Karenina is invited. And so those are such different people, so incredibly impossible to merge in one company. But if anyone can do it, it's Stiva. And it's amazing that now that this party is going so well that everyone relaxes. I mean, it's just like, it's so wonderful to go to a party where you're not going to be ambushed, where you can just sort of sip your wine and relax and chat to people about nothing and feel good about yourself and the world. We need those. Without those, humanity would just not survive. And in the midst of this joyous conversation where everyone is just sort of, talking, but when the conversation starts getting a little too out of hand, a little too argumentative, a little too unpleasant, Stephen knows how to just tone it down and make it pleasant enough for everyone more wine. And in the midst of this relaxed, joyous party, two young people get a chance to sneak away and have a conversation that gets them to exactly where they need to be. And that's the beauty of that chapter. Without someone as immoral but perfect in his kind of talent area, someone like Stiva, the two young lovers could not have had the chance to just relax enough to put everything that angered them in the past behind. And the conversation at this party is about women's rights and whether women should work. And some of the more conservative friends are saying, well, women want the right to work, but what about obligations? They are looking for their rights, but will they serve as jurors? Will they do the hard stuff? Will they do all of the things that we men are not all that thrilled about doing, that in a society imposes too much time on us? And it's fascinating how Tolstoy will go back to this jury duty issue in his later novel Resurrection, where the novel starts with an upperclassman, going through his morning routine, very similar to Stiva's routine. He loves his body, he loves his clothes, he loves his food, and then all of a sudden he shows up to jury duty, and that really takes him out of his environment because he's thrust into the world of people that are not of his class. And I shall say no more because something shocking, absolutely shocking, happens to him while he's doing his jury duty. So it's amazing how this conversation about would women want to do all of the things that we men don't want to do so much, like sit on juries. And that's very new because judicial reform was just happening in Russia in the 60s. That's what Brothers Karamazov is all about, because we have people serving on a jury at the end of Brothers Karamazov. That's a huge part of the very end of the novel. And of course, the person who diffuses it, once again, it's Prince Sherbatsky, and he's saying, well, they won't hire me as a wet nurse in an orphanage. And am I complaining? No, I'm not complaining. And so it's amazing how that sweet, charming joke is still something that we're discussing today. And so that conversation, but Stephen knows how to make that conversation just flow. And it's amazing how as soon as Levin realizes that Kitty is predisposed towards him and there's that glow of love in her eyes, he starts loving everyone. Everyone just becomes charming and sweet and delightful, and he wants to agree with everyone. And I love the fact that he starts engaging in this conversation about women's rights, and he agrees with absolutely everyone, no matter how different the points of view are. And then he brings it up to Kitty, and he says, yes, women's rights, women need to work. And he looks at Kitty and he sees horror in her eyes. And then Tolstoy is just so brilliant. And he says that Levin intuitively understood the terror of spinsterhood in Kitty's eyes. And that one tiny phrase, he understood that Kitty does not want to spend time as a spinster in relatives' families taking care of children, because I mean, as cruel as it sounds, there were families where they would be like, 12, 13 kids, and one of the girls would not be allowed to marry because she was the designated one who will be the spinster, who will help everyone with their kids. And so she would go from family to family, whoever has a newborn, she would be there to help out. And so Levin saw the horror, the terror of spinsterhood in Kitty's eyes, and he knew that she was not meant to be someone who helps others. She's meant to be loved, and loved deeply and profoundly by a person who would love her for who she is. And so that conversation between the two of them. Okay, tissues, everyone. It was just so adorable. And then at the end, that the last paragraph of that chapter, Tolstoy tells us, and they understood everything. Like, they didn't discuss the fact that Levin will come in the morning. They didn't discuss anything, but without having to say these things, they understood that she will tell her parents that evening that they will be expecting him in the morning, and everything will be decided. So none of that had to be spoken because they completely understood. And then Levin spends a completely mad evening. He goes to people and bores them to death with his happiness. And people are just looking at their watches and thinking, like, what has gotten into him? Like, Levin, who is such a introvert, such a silent, brooding type, all of a sudden is talking nonstop. And it's fascinating. He's actually leaving the party with his brother Koznyshev, and Koznyshev is just looking at him and saying, like, what has gotten into him? What's going on? He was actually joking. He was funny. And do you remember the funny joke that he says that he was on the same train with Karenin coming from Europe? And he was wearing his sheepskin coat, which is a peasant coat, right? And so he busted into Karenin's train compartment, and Karenin wanted to get him kicked out because that was first class, right? And then Levin said he started speaking. He started a smart conversation in French, and that's how Karenin knew that. Do you see how Tolstoy makes a comment there about class and about attire? There's a wonderful Russian expression: "Встречают по одежке, провожают по уму." They greet you by your clothes, and they part from you by your brain. So he definitely was greeted by his coat, and he parted from the company in that train compartment by his brain. There'll be a scene like that in The Idiot of Brothers Karamazov. In the Idiot of Dostoevsky. Sorry, for my brain, Dostoevsky and Brothers Karamazov are synonyms. So there's a scene like that in The Idiot of Dostoevsky, where a character wearing a sheepskin coat comes into a compartment where there's a prince. So this train business and theater business, they have fascinating concepts in the 19th century because classes mix in trains and classes mix in theaters, and this inter-exchange of people from various strata of society in these newly discovered spaces, because theaters did not exist. There were private theaters for wealthy people. So 19th century public parks, public museums, train stations, trains, and theaters. They are very, very 19th century spaces where classes meet. And Tolstoy is definitely attuned to the fact that these are the spaces where there are interesting interactions. And so Levin bores people to death with his talk. He's so in love. And then one of my favorite passages of the entire book is he rushes to the Sherbatskys in the morning, realizes they're all sound asleep, and then he has to kill a few more hours. And he sees boys going to school. And he sees boys going to school chasing pigeons while he can smell the smell of freshly baked bread from the bakeries. And he makes a mental note and he says to himself, I will never see these things with as much purity as I'm seeing them now. And just, stuff like that. It's just, this is when I tell my students, Tolstoy has just knocked your socks off. I mean, that passage does not need to be there. We need it for absolutely no reason at all, except for the fact that Tolstoy is a genius. And so this moment of Levin knowing that my life at this moment of me contemplating the schoolboys, the pigeons, and smelling the fresh bread, this is the moment where I will always remember that there was a before and an after. This is the watershed moment of my life. And he sees these things with complete pure joy. Like I can still remember the smell of fresh bread in the town where I grew up. I can smell it now. It is just such a basic, happy, soulful feeling. And I can remember the pigeons that I used to look at when I was a kid. I can remember, being a kid, chasing pigeons while smelling fresh bread. It is just, Tolstoy really gets to the core what we associate with just the kind of joyousness that is not related to anything. Like we get absolutely nothing out of boys chasing pigeons or school kids going to school or smelling fresh bread. It is not associated with anything that is of any benefit to us or any value that can be quantifiable. It's just pure joy. And so he brings Levin at his most open moment of happiness into the kind of joy that is the joy of childhood. And he does this also in War and Peace. Because I'm not going to give names or tell details, but in War and Peace, there's a character who sees another character and he's wondering, this character is connected to my childhood. And then you as reader realize these two did not know each other in this character's childhood. But then we realize that what the association is in his very feverish brain is that there's a young love associated with this man. And he puts that young love into the compartment where all of the most sacred memories of childhood are. His love for this woman is so pure that he cannot place it anywhere else in his soul, but together with the memories of the most sacredly pure childhood. And so Tolstoy does it one more time with Levin. And then, of course, just like a character on the last page of volume 1 of War and Peace, there's a character looking at the sky and seeing the lofty sky and how the sky communicates to his soul. And at the very end of volume 2 of War and Peace, there's another character who looks up at the sky and sees a star. So it's fascinating how in page and a half, he brings Levin into the same moments as those characters in War and Peace. The connection was the purity of childhood, the looking up at the sky and feeling that there's this profound connection between us and this eternal beyond, and also distinctly seeing a star that he feels is like speaking to his soul. And at that point, he just goes over to the Sherbatskys, and everyone sees him as the happiest of guys, and he's the happiest of guys, and he thinks that all people are the most beautiful people, and everyone is just so delightful. And Kitty says yes, and then mayhem begins, and he's sent to the florist, and the florist knows exactly what he needs, and the florist is so charming. And then he's sent to all of these Moscow establishments, and everyone is expecting him, and Stiva is taking care of everything, and Levin just feels like this is done because this is done, because this is how it must be done. And so he's soaring on these wings of happiness, while Anna is dying in child labor. And so the juxtaposition of these two couples, how in books 1 and 2, we have Sad Levin and the end of his life and him feeling that he's just going to spend the rest of his life alone. And Anna feeling that she is awakening to this illicit love that is so needed for her, because she, just like Stiva, she's a very people-oriented person, and to have Karenin, who is a cold and distant husband. He's wonderful, and it's amazing to what extent we learn just various aspects of him that we didn't anticipate. If he could have had Anna in her bedroom recovering from illness for the rest of her life, with himself hovering over the crib of the newborn baby, he would have been a content man. And of course, Seryoja, whom he all of a sudden discovers and towards whom he has emotions now. And Seryoja, so this is the perfect Karenin life. Anna is in bed. He checks on Seryoja. Seryoja is doing perfect studying in his study. He checks on the baby. The baby is sound asleep in the crib. He goes to work. He passes amazing bills. He saves Russia from the enemies and from complete destruction. He comes home. Anna is still in bed. Seryoja is still doing studies in his study, and the baby is still asleep in the crib. He would be a content human being, because that's how his mind works. Everything has to be logical. Everything has to be in its own place. But life is just so messy. Life is just all change all the time, change that we don't plan for, change that we don't anticipate. And of course, Anna wants out. The baby is screaming because the baby is hungry, and Seryoja will grow up, and poor Karenin. Tolstoy's comedic genius is at its very top when Karenina needs to examine the breasts of the nurse, and she's like hiding her very large bosom and questioning the sanity of the person who would question her ability to produce milk with those boobs. So that scene is just pure comedic genius. And of course, the entirety of Moscow and St. Petersburg laugh at him. They're completely, he's a cuckold husband who found forgiveness, and that's ridiculous. So we assume that if we are going to be kind to people and forgiving, that people will take it as a positive thing. And no, people will laugh at us. They will think that we have lost our minds, that we have to be tough and hard, and we have to fight, that we can't give an inch. That's what people praise in us. But if we become soft and mushy, people just utilize that and use it against us. And that's what's happening to poor Karenin. He thought that being benevolent and kind and loving is going to place him both in his soul and in the world outside his soul into this exalted position. And he finds that peace in his soul, but outside his soul, even the wet nurse is laughing at him. There's just the mockery of him everywhere he goes. And he finally relents, and he allows Vronsky to come and visit Anna, and they bolt. And I think one of you asked, what about the baby? The baby goes to Italy. So yes, the baby goes with them. And that whole scene of postpartum and the horror of that delivery is all Tolstoy's recollections of Sonia's fifth pregnancy and fifth delivery. It was catastrophic. Her head had to be shaved off because they had to put cold compresses on her, and the hair was just too heavy. She was in horrible fever, and so just to alleviate her pain, they shaved her head, and that was the recovery from pregnancy number 5. After that, of course, she had 9 more. Absolutely shocking. Absolutely shocking. And so that photograph that I posted of Sonia after her hair was shaved, and she was wearing this little cap on her head until her hair grew out again. Anna, what do we do with Anna? What do we do with Anna? And all of that talk about divorce, and that lovely lawyer who was catching moths all the time, all through the conversation, catching moths. Because he's a spider, he's a spider. And as soon as Karenin leaves, he's just looking at his curtains and thinking, well, this is going to be such a lucrative case. I'll get new curtains, perhaps new upholstery. Yay. and then, and then he catches one more mouse, just to keep himself practiced. So you found out from my extra post that the whole divorce aspect of the novel is based on what happened to Tolstoy's sister Masha. So I always assumed, like for years, I assumed that the mother died in childbirth, but no, she fell off a swing when she was still quite weak, recovering from delivery, and she died. And that's exactly the death of the mother in The Secret Garden. I mean, that's why The Secret Garden is locked up and Colin is not allowed to go there, because that's the place where the mother died. And so the reawakening of The Secret Garden and the reawakening of the relationship between the son and the father, who now does not blame the boy for the death of the woman whom he loved. It's such a complicated novel psychologically. It's so very English. And so it's amazing that Tolstoy's mother died the way the mother died in Secret Garden. And so Masha marries at 17, and remember, the 4 boys wanted to make sure that she has full share of the inheritance. So there were 5 children, 3 brothers, then Leo, and then Masha. So they were closest in age to each other. They were 2 years apart. She got her full inheritance, and she was a very wealthy heiress, and she married at 17, and it was a catastrophe. And so she left her husband with the children. 1 child died in infancy, so she had 3 children that left with her, and she had to live abroad because she had no place in Russian society. And then, of course, she has a child out of wedlock with a Swedish aristocrat. And because of that daughter, who has no social status, she had to live in Europe until the girl grew up. I will not tell you how her life ended, because it's truly fascinating. So I'm going to tell you how Masha's life ended at the end of the novel. But that is where. So do you see how Tolstoy just takes everything out of the life of people around him, to the point where his oldest children, Serozha and Tanya, become Serozha and Tanya in the novel. Serozha becomes Anna's son. And he's about, when Tolstoy is writing a novel, his son Serozha, and he's observing Serozha. He's like watching Serozha. When he writes Serozha in the novel, he's a very, very real child. And he behaves like a real child would at the age of 8, 9, 10. And then it's the same with Tanya, because he based Tanya on his daughter Tanya, whom he's observing every day. And then the little ones have less personality, and we don't even know his names, because Tolstoy doesn't know the personality of his younger kids. They're like these little babies that need to be, swaddled and tickled. And fed with plenty of milk. And he understands about the whole wet nurse thing, because Sonia could not nurse one of their kids because she had horrible mastitis. And one of you actually posted the letter that Andrei Bers, the father of Sonia, sent to Tolstoy, telling him that he is a blockhead and he should leave his wife alone, and he should engage a wet nurse for the baby, because the baby needs food and his wife needs peace and quiet, and he should stop terrorizing her with his ideas about how babies need to be nursed, because he's not doing the nursing. So even that joke of Prince Sherbatsky about, they won't hire me as a wet nurse in an orphanage, that is partly related to that letter that the father-in-law sent to him, telling him, you're not nursing that child, a wet nurse will, and leave your wife alone. So I think that's all I have to say for books 3 and 4. If you have any questions, please go ahead and ask them now. Let me look at the time. Yeah, we have a few minutes. So if you have any questions, I would love to answer them. And we are already diving into books 5 and 6. And as I was chatting to you before we started the official Zoom, I was saying that I always hope when I start working on the next 3 chapters that Tolstoy will give us a break, that there will be like half a page or even 2 pages that I don't need to comment on. But he doesn't do that. It just, every line matters. Every word matters. We literally could just spend the rest of our lives just reading this novel. It would drive us mad. But I have to skip so much. And sometimes I just present just paragraphs of Tolstoy without commentary, because we're just really enjoying his writing. We're just giving plenty of time for us to digest the incredible complexity and importance of every single passage of every single paragraph. The conversation between Levin and the priest, that's a masterpiece. That is a complete masterpiece. And Levin still walks out an unbeliever. He still has all of his doubts. And the priest gives him a different way of looking at his doubt. And the priest says to him, we all doubt. You are not alone in your doubt. If you think that you are so special because you doubt, you are not. That's the human condition. We all doubt, but just look around you and tell yourself that you understand where all this came from. If you have a rational answer to all this, then I would love to hear it. And then he just says, and then you will have little children and they will ask you questions. And what are you going to tell them? That you doubt everything? And then they will tell you, well, I mean, what is there to doubt? It's all real. Just the extension of your faith is right here. And that conversation is just a complete masterpiece. And then I told a friend of mine, I didn't know that I'm an expert on orthodoxy, but look at me. I just wrote all of those long paragraphs. And then I kept thinking, oh, they need to know about the wedding ring. Oh, they need to know about the crossing. Oh, they need to know about the icons. And it's a very different, way of approaching faith. Eastern Christianity is just so different from Western Christianity. Eastern Christian priests have to marry. They have to marry because they have to be the models of family life for their parish. And the matushka, the wife of the priest, she plays a huge role in the church because then all the women can go to her and ask her all of the questions. And so it's a very wholesome, sort of communal way of worshiping, where you don't sit during the service. You walk around the church. My favorite book of Russian cultural history is by Orlando Figes, and it's actually called Natasha's Dance, because in his introduction, he talks about Natasha dancing at the ball, a very Western style of dancing, and Natasha dancing at the uncle's. And he compares the two, and he feels that somewhere between those two is the essence of Russianness in the 18th and 19th centuries. But he compares Russian church service to a marketplace, right? It's like a market. You walk around and you engage with various parts of the church at different times. The service keeps going, and the service is very repetitive, very mystical. You don't understand what is said because I don't understand ancient church Slavonic. But the melodious singing of the choir and the repetitive nature of the service just allows you to just go through this ritual. And as you are going through the ritual with the entire community, you're free to roam around the church and have a personal relationship with certain icons. And you light candles at certain icons, you pray at certain icons, you kiss certain icons. There might be visiting icons, and there would be a very long line to come and worship in front of the visiting icon while the service keeps going. So you are engaged on a communal level, but you have a very individual and mystical outcome of this experience of you going to the service. And then the Easter service lasts till dawn. Yes, it starts a little before midnight and it goes on for hours. And the mystery of it is what is so incredibly appealing, because it's so visceral. It's so deep down. It's not anything that you can understand by reading a book and saying, okay, I now I understand. And it's amazing how that's the essence of writers like Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. At some point, they bring their characters to an understanding that is away from rational understanding. I always tell my students that when you're reading War and Peace and a character says, I understand nothing, that's when the church bells are ringing. Because I understand nothing means I am done trying to rationalize things. What I need to understand is here, not here. And Levin obviously is the great example of that. He finally understands things here. That's that feature that allows him to intuit Kitty. And we'll talk about the wedding scene when we're discussing 5 and 6, which is miraculous. It's absolutely miraculous. And Tolstoy is such an epic writer. I wrote this in my commentary. But here he allows the flair for the dramatic, because we have women talking, and women who are saying, I remember myself being this way and how lovely it was and how different it is now. Or Dolly saying, yes, it's different now, but it's still glorious. And then the peasant women saying, do you see her? Do you see how she's wearing the train? Oh, I need to try that. And oh, look at how pale she is. Is she really getting married? Because against her will, he is so wealthy. He is taking her to his estate. I mean, all of that delightful women gossip. It reminds me of certain passages from Moby Dick, where you all of a sudden have like this noise of conversations of sailors from around the world, and you are so completely disoriented. Then there's this, like Bakhtin called it heteroglossia, and you hardly ever have heteroglossia in in Tolstoy, this multi-voicedness. You have that in Dostoevsky, because Dostoevsky has like these mass scenes where people from different classes are constantly interacting with each other. Tolstoy hardly ever has that, but those peasant women or the townswomen who snuck into the church for the wedding and their commentary on the wedding, that is just, I mean, it blows my mind. I mean, Tolstoy going there, just not something that you would expect. So it's like the whole wedding scene is a masterpiece.